In the UK this week, Prime Minister Keir Starmer made a speech, definitely not to be called a reset, apparently, where he launched 6 milestones against which his government, he said, should be judged in 5 years' time. But lurking over his shoulder as he did so was a spectre, one he made passing reference to, but which he hopes will simply fade away if only his government can deliver against its targets. That spectre was given sharp focus also this week when the Sunday Times suggested that Elon Musk, who has been outspoken in his criticisms of the UK government, might be looking for ways to donate something like $100,000 to Nigel Farage and Reform UK. This would be to support Farage's ambition for reform to overtake the Conservatives and sweep into power from a standing start at the next general election. In so doing, it would mean the complete rewiring of the British political system in a way that hasn't been seen since the Liberals fell from their previous position as the natural party of government at the start of the 20th century. And it comes down to two things: a powerful populist message that cuts through more cleanly than Starmer's tortuous technocracy, and money. Elon Musk's money in this case. So let's talk about this. For a long time, it's been held that the UK political system, although it's influenced, of course, by money, is much more insulated from its corruption than is the United States. For example, in elections, there are strictly enforced rules about the maximum amount of money that can be spent by the political parties on their campaigns. Although these amounts seem like real money to UK observers, they are pocket change compared to what routinely gets spent in America. TV political advertising isn't allowed, although the BBC allocates a set number of slots for party political broadcasts.
First, a party political broadcast by the Labour Party.
Paying members of Parliament cash for services such as asking parliamentary questions in support of your company. Such things are against the rules, as some MPs have found to their cost. So while the major political parties sometimes get exercised about political party funding, it's usually only when they notice that their main competitor is getting a bit more cash than they are. And that soon passes because, depending on their political performance, it all switches back again in due course. The standard rule is that the smaller parties, the plucky challengers, they get very little money, which suits the big parties perfectly fine. But here we are today in a situation where Reform UK, the political vehicle for Nigel Farage, helped to depose the Tories at the last election by taking many of the votes of people who would otherwise have been expected to vote for them. Now, they only got 5 MPs, but with the UK's first past the post system, that's actually quite an achievement from a standing start. But they are left in second place in many constituencies, including quite a number that were won in the last election by the Labour Party. Nigel Farage is ambitious for his party to overtake the Conservatives, to become at least the main party of opposition, and preferably in one fell swoop to become the party of government. And he has 5 years. The backdrop to this that makes him confident that his time has come, of course, is the populist right wave that has been sweeping across a number of countries. In Europe, for instance, populist right parties are winning elections, nearly winning elections, and generally becoming a force to be reckoned with. And, of course, in the United States, we had the leading wave with the return of Donald Trump for his second term as president. So why shouldn't that happen in the United Kingdom, asks Nigel Farage. Generally, the answer is such things don't happen here because the British, we're all just too moderate to go for all that high-energy populism, too sensible, too pragmatic. Look back through history, 1848, when all the Europeans were having revolutions to varying degrees of seriousness, good old Blighty just sailed through serenely. Now, of course, that sounds like the sort of comforting illusion that is just waiting to be shattered, because people are people, after all, and we already had a flavour of this revolutionary mindset, didn't we, with the Brexit vote. Hence, the main parties are genuinely worried about this moment in UK politics. Not least because they watched Elon Musk buy his way into the favours of Donald Trump in ways that would be held under the UK law to be wholly corrupt. Not illegal in the US, but certainly not acceptable here. And they watched him take against Britain's government on his own social media platform, spreading conspiracy theories and demonstrably untrue things to attack the current Prime Minister. And the fact is that while party spending in elections is controlled, donations to parties and spending by parties outside of elections is much less so. There are rules against foreign agents donating to political parties, but if Musk wanted to donate to Farage, there would be multiple potential ways around that. I mean, it could be a corporate donation from a UK subsidiary of Twitter, or, according to Musk's father, he would be eligible for British citizenship, so could take that in order to make his donations. And so you might end up with someone who, after all, is a major figure in the next American administration, actively campaigning and resourcing not just an opponent of the UK government, but a disruptor party whose aim is to completely reshape British politics to its core. And if Labour is worried about this, it must be because they understand they might well be vulnerable to it. Nigel Farage gets called many things, and I have my own view on the veracity of some of his claims, but what is indisputable is that he is a highly effective campaigner. His messaging cut through on Brexit, his messaging in the last election capitalised on the Tories' failures to meet their own targets on immigration. And on the other side, you have Keir Starmer. I personally hold that Starmer is an old-fashioned, decent British politician in public life because he genuinely thinks he can make a difference for the better, but he speaks like a technocrat. His public pronouncements are so boring. I can't listen to more than 5 minutes of his speeches, and I'm interested in this stuff. I'll just go and get a transcript and scan it quickly for anything that's not a platitude. And look, his speeches on the page look like this. It's barely literate, short phrases, hardly anything that would even count as a complete sentence. Labour may have arguments to make for why they are doing what they are doing, but it's hard to say that they are effectively, right now, making the argument, winning the case. This week we had Starmer making another speech where he launched his 6 milestones for concrete commitments that we should judge his government by at the next election. Let's go through them. The first was higher living standards. This should be easy. In theory, if after 5 years people's living standards haven't grown, almost regardless of what you did in government, there's a serious problem somewhere. But this vague promise replaced the wholly delusional one he had before, which was that the UK was going to be the most strongly growing member of the G7 by the end of the government's term. Even at the time that was made, commentators were pointing out the practical impossibility of the UK achieving higher growth rates in that timescale than the United States. And if you add to that a first budget where Labour raised taxes on businesses significantly through employer national insurance, it's hard to see where that spurt of growth is going to come from. 2. More specific, building 1.5 million new homes in England. This has always been difficult because of all the planning bureaucracy and the barriers. To turn that around in 5 years, considered by many to be impossible, so if they manage it, that will certainly be a real achievement. 3. 92% of patients in England waiting no longer than 18 weeks for routine treatment by the health service. At the moment, the figure is under 60%. Now, this is one very specific aspect of the health service. Lots have pointed out that when you single out one performance measure like this for a complex service, you end up with unintended consequences because many of the other important things get deprioritised. But we'll see. Number 4, putting police back on the beat with 13,000 additional police officers. I'm not sure I can remember a time when that wasn't one of the promises of the government of the day. You might wonder, why didn't it happen yet? And are these officers going to be reducing crime, or are they going to be visiting people who post mean tweets? When Tony Blair did his pledges at the start of government in 1997, his equivalent was fast-track punishment for persistent young offenders. Now that's an outcome measure, not just about how many police you're going to employ. But more to the point, why isn't Labour talking about the other side of the equation, the underfunding behind the criminal justice system that has created a huge backlog in court cases, and the overcrowded prisons that have left no spaces left to put new prisoners anyway? You could not today fast-track those persistent young offenders because the courts are gridlocked and the prisons are full. So what you going to do? Number 5, getting 75% of 5-year-olds in England ready to learn when they start school. At the moment, only 68% of children were judged to have a good level of development by the time they started school. I wasn't aware of that and will be intrigued to know what they think they can do to address it. I'm curious as to why the entire performance of the education system after that point doesn't get any kind of target whatsoever. And finally, 6, energy security and clean energy. 95% renewable energy powering the grid by 2030, which on a purely engineering level is an extremely ambitious stretch target. Nothing on immigration, an omission that Nigel Farage and the Conservatives were both quick to jump on. And the fact is, none of those promises stand out as particularly compelling when it comes to the electorate. If the Labour establishment fear, as by all accounts they do, that they have to be seen to perform and deliver over the coming 5 years in order to fend off the menace of Farage, is that really the platform to do it from? Right now, Farage's calculation is twofold. One is that he is wholly confident that Labour, given its current performance, is going to remain unpopular throughout its government. It will be vulnerable. 2, he believes that his brand of populism will be more effective in framing an opposition to them than the official opposition, the Conservatives led by Kemi Badenoch. The main barrier will be getting the opportunity to cut through, because a minority party with just 5 members in the House doesn't get many opportunities to shine in Parliament. And well-funded official oppositions get more campaigning visibility outside of Parliament. Hence the attraction of appealing to the Donald Trump campaign machine, using Farage's good relationships with Donald and hence with Elon as well to attract the amplifiers, i.e. the money. He has already some degree of amplification via Twitter, but his target audience doesn't really live on Twitter, and he knows that. But the lesson of the Trump campaign is the traditional political tools. The lots of activists pursuing a good ground game, canvassing the homes of voters, leafleting, knocking up on election day to remind people to vote. All that traditional activity that used to give you the edge doesn't necessarily apply in the modern era, where you can shovel money through digital communications to great targeted effect. And this seems to be what the British establishment fears. Britain has been resilient in the past because our elections were well run. Nobody believed that they were fixed, or indeed could be fixed, because they were well organised, transparent, paper-based. Parties were funded, but not too well funded. What could be spent was regulated. Traditional mainstream media was regulated to give opposing candidates equal exposure, and so on. All very fair and very British. But suddenly they've woken up to the idea that maybe those rules could be made obsolete. A populist wave of the sort of promises that didn't used to cut through with the floating vote to make a winnable proposition. A new surge of moneyed interest prepared to fund a wholesale assault on and reform of how the system works. And the fact that as we look at it today, the government and its civil service has become more famous for its slow movement, its inability to get much done, and to get anything done in a hurry. Maybe it is particularly vulnerable to that assault. Keir Starmer made passing reference to the lure of populism later on in his speech, but nobody but the journalists were still listening by the time he got there. He also, for the first time, criticised some elements of the civil service for being too slow, for being satisfied with what he described as managed decline. Now, that was significant. It stirred up a bunch of resentment and protest, but it was surely a recognition that the system as it currently exists is not delivering. And if his party is to have any chance of being more than a one-term government, that has to change. As things stand, you should expect Elon Musk and Nigel Farage to talk down the likelihood of imminent big donations. They know it's not a good look, and if it's going to happen, they'll need to find ways to do it that don't come across so starkly like a foreign billionaire, an agent of the US government, interfering, supporting the political opposition of an elected government of an ally. But of course, if they want it to happen, there are always ways, sooner or later, to make it happen. The point is that the UK may be resistant to populist waves as they are sweeping through Europe, but with a lacklustre Prime Minister who seems unable to politically campaign, and an opposition still reeling from the worst defeat in their history, we may be about to find out if the UK is actually fully immune to populism, or whether it could end up changing more profoundly than anyone had ever imagined that it could.